In The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, if you go into this cave in the east portion of the map, you'll find this, a cave with rolling waves. Now, when I first discovered this, I was excited. You see, I live near the ocean, and one of the coolest things about living near the ocean is tides. Going somewhere to see what is uncovered when the water level drops is truly fascinating. So I began to wonder, since Hyrule has a moon cycle, and the moon is what causes tides, does Hyrule's ocean have tides? I waited and looked for a long time, but the water level never dropped. So I began to look online. Reddit, the Zelda Wiki, Blue Sky, even 4chan. No one had any answer other than, there are no tides. If Hyrule doesn't have any tides, then is this really an ocean? Now, before we get into that, I gotta explain how tides work. Most explanations on the internet go something like this. The moon causes tides because it pulls water from one side of the planet and thus we have tides. But that's not really the whole picture. It is true that on the side where the moon is, you do see a high tide. But there's also a high tide on the opposite side of the planet, essentially looking like this. So let's take a theoretical example. Here we have Planet Zelda and Moon Link. In a static vacuum, what happens when these two objects are placed next to each other? They attract each other. Well, no, not like that. It's due to gravity. Okay, so now imagine that this is an orbital system of planets like we have in our solar system. Planet Link and Planet Zelda are orbiting through the system and have a high starting speed. Link is moving fast enough that despite being extremely attracted to Zelda's gravity, it's never enough to make him crash into her. This is due to Link's tangential velocity, allowing him to orbit. And this works because, actually, I don't really have time to explain all of Newtonian physics in this video about Hyrule's oceans. So let's focus specifically on how the moon causes ocean tides. You're just gonna have to trust me that the moon's not gonna crash into Hyrule. If you want me to make that video, let me know in the comments. Even though Zelda's gravitational force is a lot stronger than Link's, Link is still attracting Zelda through his gravitational force. Something we haven't mentioned yet is that gravitational forces diminish over distance. The farther something is away from a strong gravitational force, the less impact it has on that object. As a result, Planet Zelda looks like this. The water closest to Link very slightly accelerates towards him because it's not bound by rock. The rocky middle accelerates slightly towards Link, and the water on the opposite side of the planet accelerates the slowest because it's the farthest distance from Link, resulting in a high tide of water on both sides of the planet. Finally, Earth, Planet Zelda, is rotating on its axis. Since the water on the surface isn't bound physically the same way that all of the landmass and rock is, these two high spots, or high tides, change geographical location as the Earth rotates. Now, this is just scratching the surface, of course, because it gets way more complicated than what I'm saying. Every large gravitational force has some form of attractive force to the Earth, so even the sun has an impact on tides. Geography also matters a lot. Sometimes the physical makeup of a location allows for a tide to have a bigger variation just based on how it's shaped. So, are we a step closer in determining if Hyrule has an ocean? Since we know Hyrule doesn't have any tides. Something you may be wondering after learning this information. If a gravitational force is applied across the entire planet, then why don't lakes and ponds have tides? Well, the answer is they do. This lake has tides. This pond has tides. This freaking puddle has tides. The depth variation is just so small, it's not observable. So, since we don't see any observable tides in Hyrule, but we know that Hyrule has a moon cycle, we can infer that whatever body of water this is, it's not large enough to have observable tides, further lending credence to the idea that Hyrule doesn't actually have an ocean. Going down this bloopy hole has made me wonder, what really makes an ocean an ocean? Like, why isn't this just a really, really, really big lake? So, it's time to talk about volumetric hydrological geological nomenclature, also known as how you name a large body of water. So, what's the difference between a lake and an ocean? Well, in my research, which included reading an oceanography textbook, looking at various scholarly articles online, and consulting with my friend who has both a master's in water resource management and a degree in marine biology and geology, I found this. It's not 100% clear, even amongst experts. But in general, for an ocean to be considered an ocean, it has to have salinity, significant depth, and an oceanic basin caused by some form of tectonic plate activity. So we know there are lakes that have a really high salinity, but they just lack the scale and the tectonic plate activity. Also, speaking very generally, lake and sea are technically semi-interchangeable. It actually originally depended more on the language of the speaker who named or discovered the lake. I cannot emphasize enough how, at least in my research, the nomenclature does not appear to be concrete, even amongst experts and people with very high degrees. So take all of this with a grain of salt. Nomenclature aside, is there anything else in the game that would explicitly guarantee that this is in fact the ocean? There's not really a good way to measure tectonic plate activity, and we have no way of measuring the depth. So that leaves salinity. The only way to know for sure if this body of water has salinity is to conduct an ecological study of all the wildlife along the coastline. Essentially, we're going to determine if anything has to live in or by the ocean. Let's get started. I ran along the entire coastline, and this is what I found. We're going to start with the obvious. Iron shell and razor shell crabs. There are plenty of freshwater crab equivalents, so this sentient large lizard that tried to kill me. Gonna mark that one down as not applicable. In the water, we see mighty and tough porgies. Again, lots of freshwater equivalent forms of fish on Earth. Seagulls, which do typically live by the ocean, given the access to more food choices. However, it's been proven that they just really need to live by some large body of water. Doesn't have to be the ocean. Notably, there are salmon in the game, but none of them are running towards the ocean for some reason. There are a few other things that make the coastline home. There are a few hylians, a dog, a few random mammals like these horses. But again, none of those things have to live by the ocean. They're just living there. Now, if you look at this rock texture, it does imply that these might be barnacles, but like most of the other creatures we've mentioned, there are freshwater equivalent forms of barnacles. None of the ground foliage is particularly revealing either. We do see one plant, however, that is the biggest piece of evidence that this could be an ocean so far. It's this. A coconut tree, or a palm fruit tree. On Earth, coconut trees are highly resistant to salt water. Coconut trees actually lean towards the ocean on purpose, so that way when their seeds drop, the ocean currents can sweep them away to other areas, allowing them to propagate to other coastal land. Now, in Hyrule, we do see these same trees in the Gerudo Desert. Pretty commonly, actually. Also, on Earth, this propagation of seeds is dependent on there being observable ocean tides, which Hyrule doesn't have. So it's hard to say if the mechanism is really the same here. At this point, everything interactable in our ecological study isn't really conclusive that this is or is not an ocean. But since we are talking about animals and plants that live near the ocean, we need to talk about one that isn't. Sand seals. What on earth is a seal doing in the desert? On Earth, there's only one freshwater species of seal, and it looks nothing like a sand seal. So what's going on here? Well, it's implied that this version of Hyrule used to be under an ancient ocean. It's possible sand seals lived in said ocean as the water level dropped, but found a way to adapt to the desert landscape. Maybe the same explanation can be used for the palm fruit trees, but they both kind of seem like a stretch at best. And the existence of an ancient ocean doesn't necessarily support there being one here and now. And so, I thought I was done. Hyrule has no ocean. Case closed. But then, I remembered something. A glitch that was circulating around the time that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild came out. If you go to this dock in Lurelin Village, crouch at the right place, open your scope, you can see what's below the surface very clearly. And what do we see? Coral. On Earth, coral only exists in the oceans, requiring a high level of salinity and consistent ocean current to survive. Every other creature we had has a freshwater equivalent or wasn't 100% conclusive in the context of Hyrule. So does this one piece of evidence mean Hyrule has an ocean? So yes, Hyrule has no tides. But because of what we learned about tides, it doesn't really mean that this is an ocean or not. It's also hard to say based on the way oceans are named and the constraints we have to work with in the game to know if this is an ocean. It's likely that this body of water has high salinity given both the presence of coral and the presence of coconut or palm fruit trees leaning towards the body of water. I also just found this out, but apparently when you pick up a palm fruit for the first time, its description literally says that it grows by the ocean so it can propagate like a coconut tree, even though for some reason they're all over the desert. Now, when examining the visual theming of the coastline, it's very likely that the developers intended this to be an open, salty ocean. It's a great vibe. I could spend all day here. So, does all this mean that Hyrule has an ocean? I think yes. I wouldn't know as much as I know about ocean tides without asking the question. It's okay to stop and look and think while you're playing a game. You might learn something, and you might find passion for something you didn't know you had. This was Vicarious. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, let me know in the comments. Also, it's cringe to say, but YouTube has told me that 98% of my watch hours are by people who are not subscribers. So, well, you know what to do. One of the best things you could do for me is immediately watch another one of my videos. So here are some options. This was Vicarious. Thank you for watching. It's a great vibe. Going down this bloopy hole, that does sound dirty.